Hello friends, welcome back once again to the course Current Regulatory Requirement for Conducting Clinical Trials in India. Lecture 8, Schedule Y and Related Rules, its overview. What will we learn in lecture 8? So we'll learn what is Schedule Y, its silent features, then Schedule Y related rules, fees required, appendices, that is 1 to 12, related forms and related rules. So this is the outline of lecture 8. It is related to Schedule Y and related rules. So as I have said, first we'll see what is Schedule Y, then silent features, Schedule Y, its history and amendment, rules related to Schedule Y, then what are the major content of this Schedule Y, then overview of these appendices, that is appendices 1 to 12, and related forms required for the clinical trial application and permission, and the relevant fees. Dear friends, in almost all the lectures we have seen somewhere or other mentioning the Schedule Y. Schedule Y is required for conducting clinical trial, the data required to be submitted as per the Schedule Y, the forms mentioned in Schedule Y. So now it is the time to see what exactly the Schedule Y means and where it is given, whether it is in Drug and Cosmetic Act or whether it is in the rules. So let us see what actually the Schedule Y is. We have seen in our previous lecture that Act and rules. The rules are divided into 19 parts. Schedule Y is under Part 10A of Drug and Cosmetic Rules 9045. What it is? It describes the requirement and guideline for permission to import and or manufacture new drug for sale or to undertake clinical trial. Means we have seen that before the manufacture, applicant has required to undertake a clinical trial for the new drug. Similarly, for the import of the new drug, it has to be undergo first to the clinical trials. So Schedule Y, it provides statutory support to Indian Good Clinical Practice Guideline and ICMR Bioethics Guideline. As this is in a rule, it is a statutory. Guideline are for the better clarification, and the rules, these are somehow mandatory. So in this Schedule Y, there are templates are given for propose a clinical trial protocol, how to submit the proposed protocol, then how to report the protocol, then what is ICF, what are the content of ICF, then trial report, submission, package insert, ethics committee, the composition, that are given in the Schedule Y. Let us see the silent feature of the Schedule Y. So the things which are not covered under the appendices given in Schedule Y, we tried to summarize all these things here in the Schedule Y silent feature. So the concurrent phase GCT permitted under the Schedule Y. So this was the amendment in 2005 that one can go for the concurrent phase of the global clinical trial. For new drug substance discovered in India, clinical trial required to be carried out right from phase 1. So if the drug is discovered in India after preclinical trial, it required to conduct all the phases of clinical trial, that is from phase 1 to phase 3 and subsequently phase 4. What is the status for the drug which is not discovered in India? So the new drug substance discovered outside the country, that is not in India, phase 1 data from that country where it has been discovered as required under Schedule Y has to be submitted. That data is as per the Schedule Y, and what is that data? It is mentioned under the Schedule Y atom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 9 of appendix. Licensing authority, after seeing that data, may grant permission to repeat phase 1 trial. So, it is very important to repeat phase 1 trial and or to conduct phase 2 trial and then subsequently phase 3 trial and if required phase 4 trial concurrently with other global trials. So, it means for the drug substance to be marketed in Indian market, the phase 3 trial are required to be conducted. The number of subject and the number of sites involved in these phases are not mentioned here, and it is depend upon the nature and objective of the study of clinical trials. The permissions for the phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3, these are generally given in stages considering the data generated from earlier phases. If the phase 1 is successful with the positive result, then they are allowed to go for phase 2 and then subsequently phase 3 and phase 4. We have seen that Schedule Y, it gives a statutory support and regulatory requirement to Indian Good Clinical Practice Guidelines and ICMR Ethics Guideline for biomedical research. It also stipulate responsibilities of Ethics Committee, then PI, then sponsor. It also gives the structure, content and format for clinical trial proposed protocol, then the report, then the format for ICF, then how to report SAE, then its a time period, ethics committee approval, its composition, that have been given in the Schedule Y. Let us see where from it has started. So, the Schedule Y history and amendment. Before 1988, we have seen earlier in our lecture also, before 1988 there were no rules and regulation for the new drugs. There were no Schedule Y, no new drug definitions. So, in 1988, Government of India, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare introduced Schedule Y by Gazette notification, that is GSR 944E, dated 21st September 1988, and as we have seen, it is related to the requirement and guideline for import, manufacture of new drug under Rule 122A, B, D and 122E. We will see these rules in our subsequent slides. At that time, the appendices 1 to 6 were present. Subsequently, in 2005, some amendments made in this Schedule Y. So, for example, GLP for toxicity has made mandatory for animal toxicity studies. Then phase lag was earlier there, means we cannot do the concurrent phase, that was removed. Then appendices further 7 to 11 were introduced to the Schedule Y. In 2013, Appendix 12 was added. Side by side Rule 122 DAB, that is for compensation in case of injury or death during clinical trial, was added. Then Rule 122 DD, that is registration of ethics committee, which is given in Appendix 8, that is also made mandatory. In 2014, formula for compensation has been devised. Though it is not in the Schedule Y, it is available in our CDSCO website, and there are 2-3 formulas for the compensation. Then amendment in SAE reporting with respect to reporting time, White GSR number 889, dated 12/12/2014. So, earlier there were the SAE reporting, but the timelines were not mentioned. It means within how much time the ethics committee has to report the SAE to the sponsor, to the licensing authority, within how much time the sponsor has to report this same SAE to the licensing authority. That has been revised and that is mentioned according to this amendment. In 2015, audio video recording for vulnerable subjects made mandatory. Then rule 122 DAA omitted, and in the rule 122 DA, the definitions of clinical trial, global clinical trial, IND, NCE, that has been given under the explanation. In 2016, post marketing surveillance was added. We have seen in our lecture first and second that academic clinical trial is non-regulatory and it does not require permission from the regulatory authority. That has been given in 2016 in the same rule. For dermal and ocular toxicity, initial testing should be done by alternative non-animal method as per OECD guidelines. This has been added, like a DRESS test and other, where there is alternative method, the animal should not be used. So, this is about the Schedule Y history and its amendments. Now, we will see what are the rules which are related to it. Rule 122 DA, application for permission to conduct clinical trial for new drug or IND. So, as per these rules, we have to apply for the clinical trial permission. Then rule 122 DAB, it is related to the compensation in case of injury or death during clinical trial. This has been added White GSR 53 in 2013. Rule 122 DAC is permission to conduct clinical trial according to GSR 63 in 2013. Rule 22 DD is a registration of ethics committee, GSR 72 dated 8th February 2013. Rule 122 DB, suspension or cancellation of permission or approval for the import and manufacturing. If the licensee failed to comply with the conditions or failed to comply with the Schedule M or the Schedule Y conditions, then suspension can happen or cancellation is also possible according to the rule 122 DB. Now, let us see what are the major content of the Schedule Y. Schedule Y, it gives a comprehensive content of whatever the require for the permission of the clinical trial. So, what we require for the clinical trial and what we require for the application of new drug. The first, we require the preclinical, chemical and formulation data. Then in preclinical, in the Schedule Y, it is mentioned in two aspects, that is toxicological study like a systematic toxicity study, single dose study, repeat dose study, dose ranging study, then teratogenicity, genotoxicity, carcinogenicity. All the studies are mentioned in the clinical. Then the second part, that is pharmacological safety study in the animal. The safety study, that is pharmacological action on the CNS, CVS, respiratory and other safety studies have been mentioned. After the preclinical, then the clinical trial, that is, as we know, the clinical trial phase 1, 2, 3. So, these are also mentioned in the Schedule Y. Then the next, regulatory requirement, that is whatever the data related to the drug and dosage form, that is its dose, strength, proposed indication, then chemistry point of view, its molecular weight, molecular formula, then identification of these drugs. That data also have to be given in form 44. That form 44 we will see in our subsequent slides. Then, as I have mentioned, proposed protocol of clinical trial, how to submit this protocol, how to make this protocol, then the responsibilities of ethics committee, then responsibilities of the sponsor, then responsibilities of the principal investigator, then format of the ICF. These are all the major content of Schedule Y. Now, let us see what are the appendices given in the Schedule Y. So, Schedule Y contains 12 appendices. Let us see one by one. Appendix 1 is a data to be submitted along with the application to conduct clinical trial for import or manufacture of new drug for marketing in the country. Means the data whatever required for the import of manufacture of the drug, which is a new drug, that has to be submitted according to the appendix 1. In this appendix, it is also mentioned that the data is required if, say for example, the data is required with respect to the animal toxicology, then it is mentioned that data is required as per the appendix 3. If it is a pharmacology, then appendix 4. Likewise, it has been mentioned. So, this is the brief about all the appendix 1 and it is required for the new drug. Appendix 1A, it has been added lately. Then it is a data required to be submitted by an applicant for grant of permission to import and or manufacture new drug already approved in the country. So, the difference is only that the data is required for the drug which is already approved in the country. Some data has been abbreviated because the drug is already approved in the country. For example, preclinical studies, animal safety, animal toxicity, this data may be abbreviated and the data required for the approved drug is as per appendix 1A. Appendix 2, it is a structure, content and format for clinical study report. Means how to propose a study, in what format, how the design should be there, then what are the content, that structure and content, everything has been given in appendix 2. Then appendix 3, it is animal toxicology, non-clinical toxicology studies. As we have seen, the animal toxicology study, that is systemic toxicity and dose ranging toxicity, all the studies and the number of animals, the number of the species, that is given in the appendix 3. Appendix 4 is animal pharmacology, is about the safety of the drug in animals. Then appendix 4 is informed consent. Informed consent form, what are the elements, that is given in the appendix 5. Appendix 6 is the fixed dose combination drug. So, here the types of FDC has been given, it has been divided into the 4. We will see in detail in our next lecture all these appendices. This is just the overview of the appendices. Appendix 7, it is undertaking by the investigator. So, what are the elements that have been given in this undertaking, how the undertaking has to be given by the principal investigator or his subordinate investigator, that is given in the appendix 8. Appendix 8 is about ethics committee. So, the composition of the ethics committee, then the responsibility, how much should be the quorum and everything about the ethics committee is given in the appendix 8. Appendix 9 is regarding the stability testing of a new drug. What should be the criteria for stability? The accelerated stability study, real time study, what are the condition of the temperature, what are the condition of the humidity, that has been given in this appendix 9. Appendix 10 is the content of the proposed protocol for conducting clinical trial. That is the proposed protocol for conducting clinical trial. In the appendix 2, we have seen that is the structure and content for the reporting the trial. Means once the study has been completed, then they have to report according to appendix 2 in that format. This is the appendix 10, it is for the proposed protocol. Okay. Appendix 11 is data elements for reporting SAE occurring in a clinical trial. So, what are the data to be captured while reporting the SAE, that has been given in the appendix 11. Appendix 12 is compensation in case of injury or death during clinical trial. So, how to and where to report this SAE, it has been given in the appendix 12. Now, let us see the how to apply, where to apply for the application for clinical trial, import or manufacture of a new drug. So, here is our site, that is cdscoonline.gov.in. It is a Sugam website, that is an e-government solution for the CDSCO. The web link is given here. So, once you open this page, it will give you the option application for submission, then the track of the status of the application, then grant of NOC. So, under these headings you can see where your application after applying lies. So, first of all you have to register yourself on this site. You have to create your login ID, username. Then after creating, then you have to apply for your application. Once apply, then you can see the status of your application. The stages are given here, that is after submission, then there is a review, and after the review the grant of NOC may be given. If there is a query, then the applicant will get a query online. So, this is the our site, you can apply here. Now, let us see while applying on these sites which forms you require to be uploaded. So, the first is form 44, which is application for grant of permission to import or manufacture a new drug or to undertake clinical trial. This is the form in which you have to apply. It is the legal form. The content and everything we will see in the subsequent slides. Then form 45 is a permission to import finished formulation of a new drug. In form 45 you will obtain permission to import finished formulation. Form 45A is permission to import a raw material. If you would like to import a raw material, that is API or bulk drug, then you get a permission in form 45A. If it is A, then it is a, you can understand or remember it is for the API. Form 46 is the permission approval for manufacture of new drug formulation. So, the form 46 is for the related to the manufacture of new drug. We have seen form 45, it is for the permission to import finished formulation. Form 46 is the permission for the manufacture of new drug formulation. Form 46A is a permission or approval for manufacture of raw material, that is API or new bulk drug substances. These are some of the other forms for the testing and analysis purposes. Form 12 is a application for license to import a drug for purpose of examination, test or analysis. These also include the clinical trial purpose. So, if somebody would like to import the drug for the clinical trial purposes, then he has to take a permission and he has to apply in form 12. It is called the test license. In form 11, you will get the license to import a drug for the purpose of examination, test or analysis. Form 12 you have to apply, you will get the form 11. Form 30, application for license to manufacture drug for the purpose of examination, test or analysis. So, form 12 and form 11, these are related to the imports, and form 30 is application for the manufacturing. If somebody would like to manufacture this test drug to be used in the clinical trial study or preclinical study, then he has to apply in this form. Form 29, you will get the license to manufacture, that is a test license, we call it test license to manufacture drugs for the purpose of examination, test and analysis. The validity of these licenses, that is from form 12, 11, 30, form 11 and form 29 is 3 years. 12 and 30 are the applications. So, now coming to the next slide, let us see the application, its format. So, this is as per the rule 122 A, B, D, DA, DAB, and these rules are applicable. This form 44 is application for grant of permission to import or manufacture new drug or to undertake a clinical trial. We have seen it. So, these are the content. First, you have to mention the name or the company, whatever it may be, along with the date. Hereby apply for grant of permission for import and or clinical trial or for approval to manufacture new drug or fixed dose combination or subsequent permission of already approved new drug. So, you have to click, you have to strike through whichever is not applicable, and the necessary information required is given here, that particulars of the drug, that is name of drug, its generic name, then dosage form, whether it is in the form of tablet, capsule, suspension, then composition of the formulation. what are the excipients, what are the diluents and the active constituent, that you have to mention. Test specification, what I have said, active ingredient, inactive ingredient, that also have to be submitted. Then pharmacological classification of the drug, indication for which proposed to be used, for which indication the trial is proposed or the drug is to be proposed, that also has to be given. Then manufacturer of the raw material, if the application is for the manufacturing of the formulation, then who is the manufacturer of raw material, that also has to be given. Then data as per appendix 1 of schedule Y, we have seen the appendix 1, data required to be submitted for the new drug. Then chemical and pharmaceutical information regarding the structure, molecular weight and other things. Then animal pharmacology, that is the safety in animals, animal toxicology we have seen, that has to be submitted. Then human clinical pharmacology, that is phase 1, 2, 3, exploratory clinical trials, confirmatory clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3, whatever the data. Then some special studies, bioavailability, bioequivalence, dissolution and stability data, that also required to be submitted. Then the regulatory status in other countries, whether the drug is approved in other countries, whether it has been manufactured, whether after the approval, whether it has been banned, whether it has been prohibited or withdrawn, that regulatory status also will help the regulator for its convenience. Then marketing information like a proposed product monograph, then draft of label and cartoons. Proposed product monograph and draft of label, that label will also be approved by the licensing authority, that should contain whatever the proposed indication, dose, how to take it, then guidance for the physician, that draft label also have to be submitted. Application for the test license. So if somebody would like to manufacture or import, then application for test license has to be submitted. Now let us see what are the fees requirement as per the Drug and Cosmetic Act and rules thereunder. So this is the fee structure for clinical trial new drug application. If the drug has been discovered in India, it has to be go through phase 1 and the fees for the phase 1 is 50,000. Then phase 2 it is at 25,000 and phase 3 is also 25,000. But in case if the drug has been manufactured or approved in other countries and now somebody would like to import it and conduct the phase 3, then the fees required is 50,000. So this is about all the schedule Y and related rules. Now it's the time for the questions and to check the memory. So let us have some questions for you. Question 1. When Government of India published Gazette notification, that is GSR 944E, and what is it, what it deals with? We have seen it in the history and other thing. So the answer is 21st September 1988 and it is a schedule Y. Question 2. In which year schedule Y was first introduced? We have seen it in history. So in year 1988 it has been first introduced. Before that there were no rules. Question 3. When is schedule Y amended version introduced for the first time? When the schedule Y has been introduced and amended first time? In year 2005 it has been amended first time. Question 4. What is new addition in revised schedule Y 2005? So we have seen there were many additions, that is clinical trial phases, protocol template, assay reporting and others. Question 5. What is fee for phase 3 clinical trial application for the drug which is approved outside the country. So the fee requirement is 50,000 for the drug which is approved outside the country and somebody would like to import it. So let us summarize now what we have seen in our lecture 8. So briefly we have seen the Schedule Y, it is a requirement and guideline for permission to import and or manufacture of new drug for sale to undertake clinical trials. Then we have seen the silent feature that the phase lag has been removed, concurrent phase has been allowed, then the phase 3 is required to market the drug. Then we have seen the history and amendment. It has started from the 1988, then first there was amendment 2005, then lot of amendment has happened until the 2016. Then we have seen the related rules. These rules were 122 DA, DAC, DAB and others. Then related forms we have seen. Form 44 is the most important, that is the application for the conduct of clinical trial or import or manufacture a new drug. Then we have seen the fees requirement, and then we have seen how to apply online and other things. We have to apply online on the Sugam portal. So this is about the lecture 8. We will see the next lecture soon. Thank you, take care and bye bye.